guess. We're all being men. I have to say this is one of those rare events where it's almost, I think the audience is potentially more interesting than the panel, in the sense that one wonders who turns out to talk about being a man. And I thought actually that women would outnumber men, but men, I think, here are very substantially outnumbering women, which is a healthy start. So let me just introduce the panel. Yousafzai doesn't really need any introduction at all, because he's been with you for the last half hour. But next to him is Michael Kaufman, and then Nick Makoha.
Owen. I'm
Owen.
Owen Thomas from Working with Men.
Ah, right, sorry. Owen Thomas. That's the difficulty of not actually meeting everybody beforehand and then guessing, which is what we do. We often do in news. Owen Thomas has a very interesting role in life. He's Service Development Manager for Fathers at Working with Men, which is a project in East London, is it? Where is it?
Well, we're London-wide, but
Yeah.
We're based just south of the river here in Bermondsey.
Yeah. Michael Kaufman is the founder of the White Ribbon Campaign. He's an educator, as they say, across the Atlantic. He's a writer, he's a consultant, and he's an innovator in trying to, in new approaches in engaging men and boys in promoting gender equality. And then at the end here is indeed Nick Makoha. He's a very dynamic writer and poet. He was born in Uganda. I can sing you the Uganda national anthem because I did VSO there. Great country. He's lived in Kenya, another great country, but he now lives here, also a great country. So thank you very much for coming. And finally, Seány O'Kane, who is a young father's practitioner. What does that mean?
Well, I'll tell you. I work for an organisation called St. Michael's Fellowship, and the work that I carry out at St. Michael's as a young father's practitioner is around offering practical and emotional support to young fathers and expectant. It's actually one of the only organisations in the country that exists that provides that level of support to young dads, and also to young mums.
Do you have a website?
We do, yeah.
www.stmichaelsfellowship.org.uk. Might be useful. So let's start. And Michael, why don't you kick us off? Okay. People have only got 4 minutes each.
Oh, okay.
Keeping a man to 4 minutes is
Tough.
pretty dodgy, but let's see what happens.
I'm going to show a few images.
Would
I
you
hope my
prefer to
time
go
has
second? Would you prefer to go second?
Depending
Anybody
on-
else got images?
Oh, do we have?
Not me.
Are they here? Are they?
Are they here?
Bam.
No,
Okay. Do you want to line them up, or they?
I'm just waiting till.
Okay.
the
I'm going to
button is-
start therefore with
Yes.
Nicholas. Yeah.
Okay, so my name's Nick Makoha. We're talking about fatherhood and being a man. I guess what I've been brought here for is because I've recently done a show called My Father and Other Superheroes, where I was kind of...
Can everybody hear all right? Do you want them
Can you hear me?
mic a bit nearer, and then you'll see if you're...
Can you hear me?
Oh, that's better.
There you go. you leaned in when I did that. Okay. So I did a show called My Father and Other Superheroes, and it was brought to fruition really at the birth of my daughter. What I realized at the birth of my daughter is I didn't really know what it was to be a father, even though I'd had a father. He wasn't actively in my life all the time, and holding my daughter in the maternity ward, I suddenly became aware of my inadequacy, I guess. And I think I could relate to your conversation, and I think being a man is more of it's a privilege, but it's a privilege that shouldn't be abused. And I think it's being a man or being whatever gender you are, it's an act of love. And I think a lot of times why we abuse these privileges is because we come from a vantage point of preservation, where we're trying to protect what we think is important. And I think what I'm learning continually through my daughter and also my son and also my partner is that being a man is a yielding. It's not a grabbing of territory. It is a yielding of territory. So it's like my friend has recently just become a father about 2 weeks ago. His child is premature, but one of the experiences he had, I called him when I was in Uganda just a few days ago, and one of the experiences he had, he just burst into tears, and I said to him, you know what's happening to you, Roger, is that your heart is expanding, and it's expanding beyond your understanding. And I think a lot of times when men are in that position of their heart expanding, what they do is they resist that. And so what you have are these positions that men hold that we really shouldn't hold. So there shouldn't be like an argument for gender equality. We should be equal. That is the equilibrium. So I think My Father and Other Superheroes is just, it's not trying to, the actual main hero in that story is actually my mother. She's the silent hero in the background who's keeping me believing in the love of my father when she could have, you know, made me resent my father or kick against him. And I remember, I mean, just to wrap it up because I only got 4 minutes, but I remember in the making of this show, one of the things I had to do was actually complete with my father because I was resentful. I mean, you know, if there's anything that men want is to spend more time with their fathers, you know. And when I spoke to my father, the thing that he said to me, and this is what makes me realize that being a man is a privilege and an act of love. You know, even as I threw all this kind of annoyance and hate towards my father said to me, you know, son, there is nothing that you can do because I will always love you. And I remember like bursting out into tears and realizing that, you know, I can't abuse my role as a man, both in my partner's life and in my children's life. I don't know if that's...
Good start.
Perfect, Nick.
Good start. Michael.
Thank you very much. So how are we now? Good. I want to show some pictures of our dominant images of fatherhood. Well, there was you know, this type of image from U.S. television in the 60s of the perfect father. The father is the center of the universe, orbited by his wife and adoring children. So we have these idealized images of the perfect father, and then at the other end we have these images of father as dolt, as incompetent, as unable. We of course have enduring images of the father as the punisher, the one who you know, wait till your father comes home. We have the images of the ultimate father, you know, the father as God figures, and of course father as protector. Now we've seen these types of images evolved over the last few years, and some of the first sort of incarnation of it are sort of these you know, greeting card images that are certainly an improvement, I would say. You know, images of fathers as loving, holding children, doing that sort of caregiving role, reading to children and so on. And I think what these images are reflecting is an amazing thing that's happening all over the world, which is you and I are witnessing the beginning of the transformation of fatherhood all over the world. That it's something that is, in a way, is going to be to men what feminism was for women. A real rethinking of manhood in the context of caregiving. Some of the things that you were talking about, that we were talking about beforehand. The idea that a redefinition of what it means to be a man isn't just about our relationships with women, but really rethinking who we are, what we value, what we prize. One of the things I've been involved in the last few years is a new international network called Men Care. We have this network which, well, a year ago we were hoping by this time there'd be about 8 countries participating, and we held a meeting a few months ago in South Africa, and there were people from about 25 countries. So, and we have the modest goal of men doing 50% of the care work on the planet. Be a couple years till we pull that one off, I think. But it really is why we are sitting here today, part of this transformation. Not just men doing the, you know, spending quality time with our children, but really spending quantity time. I love this picture of this father whose wife died in childbirth, and they came to take away the baby. And he said, wait a minute, you can't do it. This is my baby. So there he is on his bicycle rickshaw, carrying his baby with him at work. Or this very unglamorous image from the States of a man putting his child into a stroller. So what we are part of, and I think it's so fitting that we're beginning this 3-day event thinking about fatherhood, Because it really is, and I know this from my own life. My kids are now grown. My son's 32 and stepdaughter's 23. But I know this from my own life that if it wasn't for the revolution in the lives of women, that there would never have been an assumption that I would have played a role, an equal role as a parent. And it is hard work. It's not fun a lot of the time. It is miserable. It's taxing. It's all those things. But it literally is the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Owen Thomas.
Yeah, great. So within 4 minutes, what I'll do is I work for a third sector organisation, a charity called Working with Men. So I'll devote the first 2 minutes to the charity because we don't do it for the money, we do it for the work, and we need coverage. So Working with Men, our strapline is supporting positive male activity, engagement and involvement. So we do that across a number of streams, one of which is Fatherhood, which I'm the lead on. Our vision as an organisation is that all boys and men can be productive and active members of society, and that organisations work in ways that include and support boys and men, particularly those who are socially and economically disadvantaged or excluded. And our mission is to reduce significantly the number of boys and men, particularly from socially excluded backgrounds, who are unable to reach their full potential, basically, and we want them all to become productive, active members of society. So Fatherhood obviously cuts across that strand. Similarly to Seány, as he mentioned before, we're one of the very few organisations that offer support and guidance to young fathers in particular, as well as providing fathers, development workers in early years and children's settings. I think just to touch on a couple of points, we've worked in partnership over the past decade. We were formed basically, as a response to a parent who tragically lost a son to suicide back in the 80s, and basically really in trying to make sense of that ordeal and why so many young men feel so despondent that they want to take their own lives, which is the #1 killer of young men under the age of 35, I think, in this country. They found a real lack of support or discussion around male issues. The charity was born back then, and we've developed and moved on since then. I myself was a practitioner, similarly working with young fathers in the South London Borough since 2005, and we've managed to create more space to do more work, create more funding, to try and raise the issue of young fathers and fatherhood in general higher up, especially for those from excluded or disadvantaged backgrounds. We currently co-chair or hold the joint secretariat for David Lammy's all-party parliamentary group on fatherhood, so where we try and shape and influence policy and get our service users to do the same. So that's why we're here today. On a personal level, as I said, I don't work in the third sector because it brings me great riches or helps me buy a big house in the suburbs. I do it because the subject matter matters to me. I was a father fairly young myself. My oldest daughter's now in her final year of university, and it did change and shape my life. I was lucky enough actually to grow up and know my father, who is still a great man, a very intelligent man, and together with my mother worked really well to try and give me a person of mixed heritage, growing up in London, a really balanced view of not only race and equality and balance, but also gender equality and balance. So for me, it was almost like a given growing up, and I've always felt like my happiness was interlinked with everybody else's happiness, be they male or female. And I think, again, framing male behaviour, I think it's very important that we do stand and make a stand for equality and men speaking up for women's rights. As a father of 2 daughters, it's a no-brainer, and a son, as you said as well, we were all a son or brother. But also in terms of their own self-esteem, at the point you made, why should I, what's in it for me, is the really basic and selfish view that a lot of people have. And if you're socially excluded, you don't have much, you want to try and gain power rather than give it up. So I think we have to try and translate the messages that we all kind of say here into language that your average person who maybe doesn't get a chance to come to these kind of festivals will relate to and understand. And we do that by going into schools, working closely one-to-one and individually with young men and older men, and trying to work in partnership with women's groups and organisations to spread those messages. And I'll stop there.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Seány.
Thank you, John.
Good trousers, by
Do you like them?
Yes.
Like your socks. They from Reese. I get asked a lot, what is a young fathers practitioner? And that's always an interesting question, because it's not something that when I was a kid I wanted to be, and I didn't even know it existed. And it's a niche job role to have. And I think what's good to consider is what kind of person would want to be a young father's practitioner. And it's probably best I tell you a little bit about who I am and why I do that work. I grew up in Ireland, from Ireland, Derry, to be specific. And I would say that when I was growing up, I didn't really have a good relationship with my father. He was very young. My dad's just turned 51. I'm 32. So he was a teenage dad. And I struggled to have any kind of connection with my dad growing up. And it was something I yearned for. I wanted to be accepted by my dad. And just for some reason, I didn't feel loved by him in many ways. And I grew up, and he was always almost, although we lived in the same house, he was like a stranger to me. And it was this massive void that I lived with for most of my life. And even though I repressed it a lot. And as I got older, I took part in a television program for Channel 4, a huge show. And on that show, I came out. And while I was going through that process of coming out, my dad was interviewed by news reporters, and he said, "My son's not gay because I know my son. And he's not gay unless he tells me he's gay first." And I thought it was a very bold statement to make, and it was in front page of the papers, and then I felt like I had to talk about that publicly. So both me and my father appeared on Richard and Judy to talk about our relationship. And that was a real turning point for both of us, and for my dad to sit there and publicly say, I accept my son, and I love my son. My dad never told me he loved me at all growing up. And my mum would say, he does love you, just he can't express it to you, and he loves you in ways in which you probably don't understand. And that made me think and reevaluate the relationship between me and my father. And I felt there's lots of other men out there, children who maybe don't have a connection with father that they would like. And so I wanted to possibly take this beautiful thing between me and my dad and in some ways create work from it. And I discovered from my research there was an organization that worked with young fathers in London, and it was like it was written for me. There was a post, there was a job advert, and I applied for it. I was successful. I've been doing that job for 6 years now. And the ethos of the work at St. Michael's Fellowship is about always with a child in mind. The child is the heart of the family. And by supporting the mum and dad, you can create a beautiful unification of hope. And I work with young fathers, and my passion around supporting these young men is because lots of these young fathers are almost invisible in society. We talk about fatherhood a lot, but fathers are not a homogenous group. Within that context, we have young dads and gay dads and dads with learning needs, and we have to think that there's young dads out there who don't have platforms like this. And I feel that in some ways I'm a voice for them. I want them to be recognized. I want the support to be in place for them because they are really important in society, and they don't get the chance to speak up. And that's what St. Michael's is really good at. We give them chances and we give them hope. And that's why I do this work.
Thank you very much. Yousafzai, I know you probably have something you want to say off your own bat, but you were speaking before, so a lot of people have the kind of building blocks of who you are and how you are, where you are. But I wonder what you made of Michael's offering, which was felt to me utopian and, in a sense, Northern Hemisphere. We're here, but it feels light years from what I've experienced in the Indian subcontinent, for example. And I wondered whether you felt this coming age of the liberation of men, if you can put it that way, is really there when you look at your own society.
So, but I'm supposed to talk about fatherhood?
Yeah. Well, Michael, you address it to Yousafzai. The point that you made about this developing moment in which fathers, in a sense, are liberated, I wonder whether it really has application in a society in which Yousafzai is. You put it to him.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've seen is that this first and most dramatic transformation of fatherhood. It's true. You know, we've seen it. We're seeing it in the Scandinavian countries. We're seeing it in parts of Europe and North America. But I feel we're also seeing it in the global South. Not as far advanced, maybe not as dramatic, perhaps more dramatic in a way. So, you know, I think I'd be curious if you are also seeing the glimmerings of that change in fathers being more, not, you know, we don't want fathers helping. We want fathers saying, I'm a parent. We want fathers ultimately being an equal parent. As you talked about getting up and making breakfast for your children. That's man's work, but it's also woman's work. It's human work. It's parenting work. Do you see that change at least beginning in parts of the world where I think perhaps some of us here think, well, it's going to happen in England, but it's not going to happen in the Swat region. It's not going to happen in Rwanda. Do you see that beginning to happen?
Thank you very much. My experience as a son with my father, and then my experience in with the fathers in my country, especially in the Valley of Swat. My father was a cleric, and he used to lead prayers in a mosque. And he was a great father because he gave me education. And again, I'll say he was a great father that he didn't choose for me only madrasa education, but he also chose for me modern education, because he thought that my son will enter a new era and he will be the member of a new society. That's why he equipped me with the modern education, and he, instead of admitting me in a madrasa, he admitted me in a school, and I learned English. But my father was used to get very angry, and sometimes he used to be very harsh upon me. And you might have now noticed that I have stammering when I talk. So this stammering used to be increased because of his pressure. But again, he made me very eloquent because he used to write speeches for me, and I used to speak in the gatherings. So he made my weakness, which I had right from the very beginning, he turned it into a power, into a strength. What is in our society at the moment? Fatherhood. A father is meant that a son or a daughter is not supposed to share many things with his father or mother. There is a big gap. At present, mostly the role of a father is to give birth. That is biological, to give birth to a child. And many fathers who, as I mentioned in my early talk, who have some 5-6 daughters and 2-3 sons, then he leaves his home and he goes abroad or to any other big town of his country, and he just bread earner. He just he earns the bread, and he is a bread provider. So there the role of a father goes away, and when he comes back, almost all of his children, they are lost and they go astray.
But this brilliant father, who was a brilliant father to you, even whatever the difficulties,
yeah.
And was keen on your education, he had a totally different attitude when it came to his children, to his daughters, his 5
You see,
daughters.
he educated me. He
Only
never
to provide for them.
He educated me not for the purpose that I will be a bright man and I will make change and I will have he educated me basically that I should have a good status in the society, and he should be the father of a doctor, because he wanted to make me a doctor. I could not do that. So but I'm very thankful because he gave me education, and education is the ultimate solution. Education education made me a critical thinker. Education changed my mind, and I thought about my society, I thought about my sisters, and now I found myself a different father about my daughter. Mm-hmm. So it is a big change from my father to me as a father. And I think ideally a father should be like Jesus' father, I mean, when you can share everything which is in your heart with your father. What happens? For example, I used to organize parent, it rarely happens in our country, but I used to organize fathers' meetings in my school. And I used to tell them that, please, don't keep gap with your sons. Share with them everything. And
What
let
do
them
you
share
say to
with
them
you.
about their daughters?
Both. I mean, to mothers about their daughters and to fathers about their sons. Because
and,
you see,
and fathers about
fathers
their
also,
daughters?
exactly. But you see, there is a kind of evolution. Because if you say that, sorry to say, I mean, I feel now a bit shy to say, if a daughter, she has periods for the first time, it will be very difficult to share with her father. So if she shares it with mother, that will be good. What happens to her? That is a biological change. So
And there are
even
things that happen to a boy that they want to share with the father.
With father, it will be ideal if they can share with father and mother. But I used to invite them. I used to have meeting with them, and I used to tell them that before your son learn wrong things from other people, please share with them the right things about the friends, about sex, about money, about many things of life.
Right.
So that is the real fatherhood. And to be very short, our sons, our daughters, for them, there are two role models. Number one, their mother, father at home, and their teachers at school. And our children learn what we do, not what we teach.
Right.
What
Let
happens?
me pause you there.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm going to bring in the rest of the audience in a moment, but it seems to me that we've not talked at all about the environment in which all this is happening.
Okay.
Now, for example, 10 years ago, if a man fathered a child at work, if a male worker became the father of a child at work, there was no paternity leave. Today, I can tell you, our science correspondent, our foreign editor, there's a raft of people, men, who are experiencing, for the first time, paternity leave for several months, 3 months or whatever more. In the old days, you had to pull a sickie. You had to say, I'm ill, I can't come in. But in actual fact, you were trying to deal with one of the children who was ill, and your wife was at work or whatever. So, this question of whether the working environment in which we, all are harnessed is in any way recognizing the truth that you're describing, Michael. But before...
I just wanted to jump in and relate. It's quite a good segue because it relates to 2 points. I mean, I just wanted to make the point that in reviewing fatherhood in developing nations, we kind of make the assumption that we've got it all sorted here already in the West and in these countries, and we haven't by a long chalk. I think the intentions here and certain groups of men are in a better position to be able to take advantage of their kind of the space now to try and take advantage of all the benefits of being a father. But there are groups of men who aren't. And the law in this country doesn't reflect equality of parenting either in terms of if families break up and split up, access, and two wrongs don't make a right. Because we live in a patriarchal society and women are disadvantaged in often places, it doesn't mean that in the issue of parenting, we should then keep men as second-class citizens because they win everywhere else. I think it happens to a lot of the guys we work with who feel that they're not supported. They don't feel that, a lot of the young guys we work with kind of have this emotional sense awakened, as we spoke about, inside of them and want to do things and then find that I can't because I haven't got enough money or I don't get access to my child or there's no mediation to sort out the problems I have with my ex-partner or, I feel disempowered. So I think we have to remember that not every, fatherhood isn't sorted here yet. We've got a long way to go with fatherhood here before we even really would presume to start telling everyone else what we should be doing. But I think the law has changed here. I think you can get 3 months. Again, I think it's all relative. I got 2 weeks when my daughter will be 2 next week, my youngest. And I got 2 weeks and I worked for a charity. I could have maybe negotiated more, but life, mum and the rest of it didn't really allow that to happen. And I think for a lot of guys we work with who work on 0-hour contracts or cash-in-hand jobs, they can't even get a day off or they'll lose their job. So I think it's very, it's very difficult in this day and age and we're making the right strides, but And we who can should set the example and try and bring those along with us. But we should never forget that here we still have some issues around inequality of parenting, with fathers getting to a certain point and believing, well, I'm trying to do the best I can, and the doors are being closed in my face, especially in terms of support, access. You know, the schools don't ask dads their opinion if they're not coming in with mum. Do they get a letter inviting them to parents' evening? A lot of them don't. So I think, not because they don't want to, just because they're not considered. And we need to kind of raise the profile of those dads who do want to do well, and encourage those who kind of sit back and go, well, it's not my world, to say, well, we expect more.
But equally, you have fathers, young fathers, who've grown up in a very patriarchal setting, in which it hasn't been natural for the father to be involved in shared 50-50 care of the child. And I'm just wondering to what extent those men cluster together, go to the pub, leave the wife at home, leave the partner at home, to deal with the child. And when we say, we've arrived at a point where all these people want to be fathers and the rest of it, there are a good number that don't want actually that life, and really want to ensure they can go to the match and go to the pub.
Okay, we at St. Michael's, we work with young dads, and that is dads from aged under 25. So what we already know from even before receiving referrals, before working with these young men and offering the support, is that they're more likely going to come from marginalised backgrounds, low-level incomes, may have low-level education, and their own fathers are either not around or they didn't know who they were growing up. And the idea of paternity leave to them is almost an alien concept. And the reason why is because for lots of these young men, they're not working. They're not even work ready. Some of them come from second or third generations of family members that have never worked. And they're almost, again, an invisible part in all of this. We talk about a paternity leave, and I think it's brilliant. It's a step in the right direction. But where do young fathers fit into all of this, and how exactly are they represented? And I think that the reality is that lots of these dads do want to be in their children's lives. There's a real assumption and stereotype that these young men are irresponsible, are feckless, are, promiscuous. I can tell you, I work with these young men, and they want to be fathers. They want to be there. They want to be responsible. There's no infrastructure in place. They give them that support. How do you get a 16-year-old expectant father from the area I work in, Lambeth, Brixton, Clapham, to be excited and to know what it means to be a dad when their father isn't around? They don't have any male role models. They don't understand what that means to be a parent. There is a nation of these young men that exist in our society. The concept of paternity leave to them, it is alien.
Well, he could be describing a situation in the developing world. In Africa, for example, in Uganda. You've got exactly the same kind of problem.
Yeah, I think we're all men. I want to speak on our behalf, if you don't mind, but we're a part of our cowards. So everything I knew about being a father before my child was born, I totally threw it into the bin the minute my child was born, because it was based on, just as we saw earlier with these images of what I assumed. So either images from my own experience or images from television or radio. I think, and even images within our culture. So just like you're saying, I used to live in Saudi Arabia, and you saw that same story of when they have a boy child, that's what all men are looking for. And to be honest, I wasn't, in the back of my mind, I remember as a kid thinking, yeah, I'd like a boy child. But when I had my daughter, that was the best thing that could ever have happened to me. And if you had told me that, I wouldn't have known, but I really needed a daughter. As my first child, I needed a daughter. So I think our kryptonite, or there's my hero thing, but I think our kryptonite as men is that we think we know the answer. And I think we have to come from a position of unlearning. And you kind of said that before. And so my best advocate for me being a father is actually my partner. And she kind of digs it to me when I get things wrong. And I don't like being wrong, as you know. Do we like being wrong, men? No, but I'm not answering that question. And that's my perfect example. So I think, so in my father's culture, for example, in Uganda, men, they don't say much. And I think another part of my weakness is, at times when I should express myself, I don't express myself. And I think one of the things I realized, one of the reasons we did this show is that men don't like going to theatre. They don't like talking about stuff. We kind of keep it to ourselves. We'll laugh and joke about it in the pub or at the football game, but we won't discuss it at probably the apt times. So, just like what you're saying about your father, that he probably loved you, but if he had just said it a few times while you were growing up, it would have made a world of difference. And so sometimes I have to keep reminding myself to tell my daughter, to tell my son that I love them, to tell them when I'm wrong. I remember a particular instance when I shouted at my daughter when she was 3, and I was angry. I wasn't angry at her. I was actually angry at something else. And if I'd gone back into the paradigm of before, I would have just carried on and left my life. But I remember driving in my car and being in tears, thinking that's not how you talk to a child. What she's just seen is the man in her life making her wrong. And I had to come back. I remember coming back. I remember talking to my partner, crying on the phone, coming back and sitting down with my daughter and saying, look, Olivia, Daddy was wrong. I should not have shouted at you. What I was wrong, what I was angry at was this. Now, that's a process of unlearning, just like you're saying to that 16-year-old boy or that 70-year-old man who's lived his whole life like this. We need to create forums where they can talk. So that could be through theatre, that could be through conversation, that could be through just seeing Jon Snow on a trip to wherever, talking to his dad about something. But men don't have active, real-life examples of men either getting things right, admitting that they're wrong, or willing to learn something new. And I think, like even my father, I don't think my father's ever told me he loved him. I think I've hugged him once. But my mom tells me that he loves me dearly. And so I hug my son every day. And I'm not saying that my dad was bad or wrong, but I just think he lived in a society where it wasn't really permitted.
I love that idea that the mother is the messenger.
Always.
Your daddy really loves you, darling. Your daddy really loves you.
Yeah.
I mean, what crap, huh? It's fantastic.
John?
Right, Michael, and then I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, who was it, Nick or Michael?
Well, one of the things that I think we really need to do, particularly now in sort of these neoliberal times, the assumption is, well, it's just up to the individual. Come on, dads, get out there and do it. And what we're hearing and what my colleagues in men care are telling me around the world is that we need the policies to back it up. We need the programs. We need the social supports. My colleagues developing fathers groups in neighboring Rwanda were working with a group of fathers that came in enthusiastically, but they said, but we've never held a baby. And I mean, literally, these men said, I've never held a baby. So they started working with the women's co-op to make some dolls that they could literally practice how you hold a baby. So, sometimes it's simple programs. Sometimes, often it's men. It's not, I agree it'd be utopian if we just say to the world, men do it. But men are being pushed into this on our men care site. It's men-care. I want you to go there because there are these lovely videos, including this one of this man in Sri Lanka whose wife goes off to work in the Gulf states. He's left with his kids. He doesn't have a clue what to do. And he doesn't even know he doesn't have a clue. And finally, he turns into a loving, caring parent. It's absolutely stunning. So we are seeing that, but we need the support. We need the encouragement. We need the models, as you were saying, the men speaking out. But we also need the social policies and diverse policies. One size isn't going to fit all, and if we're really going to make this happen.
Yeah. And I just quickly wanted to say that's totally true. And I think engaging with young men is what we do. And I think the willingness and the desire that all of them have, 90-odd% are present at birth, whether they're with the mother or not. 6 months, a year down the line, things change. That's about relationships and emotional intelligence and being able to maintain a balance and see power and negotiate. which are skills that are learned. And if you haven't got them if you were unfortunate not to acquire really adept ones by the time you became a father, they can kind of really influence the rest of the way your life and your children's life go there out. So, you know, organisations and groups like Seány's, like ours, do that work. We try and introduce basic concepts of what masculinity is, essentialism versus constructivism, you know. Are you what you were born to be, or can you shape a different destiny for yourself? You know, and most of the guys don't want to be pigeonholed. They want to do something different. But they say to me, Owen, it's easy for you. You're a big man now. You know, although I came from a similar area of Brixton where you work, they say, the issues I face walking around day to day, the pressures on me from my peer group to be uber macho unless I'm going to become a victim in my area, it's all right for you. You're not faced with that. I am. So I think we have to include policy, we have to include education, we have to lead. Those of us who have got it have to say, this is the expectation in society on both fathers and mothers, to equally parent children. And then I think we will see, following after that, a better, more equitable way of doing things.
Points from the floor. Anybody like to make it? Yes, there's a...
Sorry to be a female asking the first question, but as a health visitor of many, many years of experience, I've seen a phenomenal change and engagement in dads coming to the clinic and being involved in childcare. But my observation is it starts right from receiving the new birth notification. The father's name is not put on that.
Absolutely.
You know, and Marisol asks, sorry, Dad, can you tell me your name? Because the mum's key does that, and that's not the man. And then the other point is, when we do follow-up visits, we screen women for postnatal depression. We haven't been taught how to screen dads for postnatal depression, which I think is very, very significant. And another place, thank you very much. We're very lucky to work with the Fathers Group in Westminster.
Great, one of the boroughs we work in.
And really interesting to get input from somebody who is actually on the front line. You know, the idea that the father's name is not put on the certificate, etc.
Can I just follow up on that? Well, first thing, it's not just, Michael, it's not just Rwanda, believe me, where lots of men don't know how to hold babies.
Exactly.
I see it all the time in my work. And lots of women, you're right. We do it through St. Michael's. We run expectant sessions, just like Owen does at working with men with their clients. I believe that I did a huge research piece last year on maternity services in London. And as Owen said about its real focus on education, he knows I'm really passionate about this point, that lots of midwives, health visitors, social workers, and health and social care do not engage in any modules at university level that teach them the importance of engaging fathers. And what we have is a real traditional group of midwives and health and social care workers who have those views of engaging dads. But there's no real structures in place to back that up, to tell them why it's important. And that's why we have lots of dads' details off the first registration, the first appointment that the mums make with the midwives. The midwives' focus is the mother and baby. And that is what they believe. And I see it time and time again where midwives have gone into houses and there's a young dad playing on a PlayStation or in another room doing whatever, and the midwife doesn't have time to engage him in the appointment because her focus is on the mother and baby.
She has 10 or 15 minutes.
Of course, and that's all she has. And other than that, she's got loads of clients. And until that changes, and in education needs to be reinforced that engaging dads in antenatal appointments is so vital. It's vital for the child's development. And what we also find is that dads and mums tend to break up more often after the baby's born, and then what happens is that the dads can't put their names on the birth certificates. They feel so undervalued from day one. They feel like they don't have a role. And our society is broken right now. We have more kids growing up without fathers in the UK than ever before. That needs to change. It needs to, from education. Fathers need to feel valued from the very beginning.
Rude, thank you very much. And from
that's one extreme that fathers are not mentioned in our country, in many other countries. Mothers are not mentioned. Yes, for example, if in my school, I used to do this, but generally you can't do it. For example, if you go to a classroom and you ask a boy, what's your name? He'll say, Mr. So-and-so. What's your father's name? This is common. But you are not supposed to ask, what's your mother's name?
No.
And even when I was seeing on Wikipedia my name one day, so in parent there is only my name, in my daughter's parent. And I wrote them that please write Torpe Kai, who is my wife. Write my wife's name, her mother name. So I think both are important. So mother is nowhere mentioned in the documents.
Very good. Or very bad, but I mean very good.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a cluster, one there and one here and one here. 3. Yeah.
Okay, it sort of starts with a really minor observation, and it's, Michael, in your slideshow, there were some very interesting men in different contexts with babies, like sort of a rickshaw rider, sort of working class man with grubby truck. There wasn't a guy with his baby in the boardroom. And I think what unpacks from that is there's a lot of guys here doing very useful practical work by the sounds of it, and also, and I hope this is no disrespect, with fairly marginalised parts of society. And is there a debate around how do we construct images of fatherhood amongst those social roles which are culturally the most visible and dominant?
Right, we're going to collect all these and react in a moment. Yes?
Yeah, if we'd sat here in this room, say, 30 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to have the quality of discussion that we've had this morning. What's come out of it is inescapably that the personal is political. And I'm wondering what people think the world will look like in another 30 years' time.
Thank you very much. And finally down here, if you can get the mic. While the mic's going down there, there's some old media that would find even this conversation more or less unbearable.
Oh, so I'm going to cheat and I'm going to ask 2 questions. The first one is, as women are still fighting for equality or even numbers in Parliament or in work or with the glass ceiling and so on, is it fair to say, would you say that your aim is to have equality in the home? You know, would you like a 50-50 responsibility? At the same time as women are looking for a 50-50 responsibility, say, for example, in politics. It seems like a nice, nice balanced way of going forward, that you're both fighting for something. That's my question. Or is that going too far? And the second question is, even as men are developing, and I feel very moved by all of this. I think it's very exciting, so many questions to ask. I see it moving all the time. But I'm the single mother of a young boy, and where I see a lack, and I'm sure I'm not alone on this, is a healthy idea of what masculinity is. In a way, my son is being exposed to a lot of the feminine, and I see that with a lot of boys with single mothers. They're getting a lot of that insight, but it's somehow robbing them of any idea of masculinity whatsoever. And do you think there is a possibility of a healthy masculinity arising out of all of this?
Very interesting questions. We can certainly start with the idea of where we'll be in 30 years' time, because it might actually embrace some of the other ideas. Where are we going to be in 30 years' time?
Well, I look at it as a model. I mean, so I think right now, like you said, 30 years ago, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. And I think what's happened is that, the thing that we're kicking against is culture, so that we have different cultural understandings of how things should be done. So a lot of times you want to make a change, but the culture will not allow you to make that change. And I think that the way that we need to look at it more like how we, if 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if I said to you, hey guy, give me a call, somebody would either have to go to a call box outside, or you'd have to go to your mom's phone and ask permission to call your friend. Whereas now, if I say give me a call, everyone just pulls out their pocket, their phone, and starts dialing away. And that's not just me, that's a little kid about 9 years old is able to call me. And I think what that means is we need to find new models and be willing to find those new models. In other words, there's a new phone. In other words, there's a new way of being a father. In other words, there's a new way of equality in the household, and we have to be willing to search for that. So yesterday, when I took my daughter to Young Voices concert, she's singing there. My partner says to me, "Isn't it strange that all the music teachers are women?" Why are they all women? So we're seeing, but we're just kind of like blanketing that away, thinking, oh, it's okay. So we've got to be willing to make those changes. And until we are willing to make those changes, in other words, say, you know what, I don't want a house phone. Let's get something that's more portable. So how can a father, as you're saying, I'd love to take my children to work some days. I'd love them to come and see what I do. I'd love my daughter to be able to think that anything is possible. And I think the old paradigm, that phone in the household, I can only make a call when I'm at home, is thinking that a lot of us are still in. And we need to be able to think, I can make a call anywhere, or I can be a father anywhere at any time.
I mean, you touched on something really interesting there, because, for example, in primary education in this country, there's an absolute crisis of levels of men teachers.
Yeah.
I have a male friend who is a primary school teacher, and he's one of only 2 men in a school of 400 primary school kids in North London. That's a very difficult situation.
30 years' time. I'd like to see lots of changes in the law. In fact, actually, a lot sooner than 30 years. I'd like to see men's names put on the birth certificate before the children are born.
He was more optimistic. Actually, where will we be?
Where will we be?
Not what you'd like to see, but where will we be? I mean, from what you said before, we might be in a worse place than we are today.
I think we might be in a society. What's that?
It's not necessarily true that it always gets better. Backwards as well.
Yep.
We could be, in 30 years' time, in a society dominated by women in power, lots of stay-at-home husbands. It's hard to predict. What do you think? Where do you think we will be in 30 years' time?
Michael, you're the expert.
Yeah, right. Thanks. I think we underestimate the pace of change. If we think, forget cell phones, we have lived through 30 years of the greatest revolution in human social history, which has been feminism, and the total changes in the lives of women and our relationships between women and men. So don't underestimate these changes. If we're able to support them with all these types of measures we're talking about, here's how quickly change can happen. Sweden and the other Nordic countries introduced parental leave for men. It was barely touched by men because men were terrified. What would their friends say? What would their boss say? So they came up with an idea of a father's quota. They said, we're going to reserve a month at first of parental leave that would be just for the fathers. Use it or lose it. And now they've expanded that. And once they did that, now it's become the norm. So I was sitting with a group of, a father's group in Stockholm, interviewing them about their experiences. This one guy comes in, he was just a massive guy. He looked like, he looked like the thug on the hockey team. And so he comes in, but he's got his little girl with him, puts her on the table in front, and he says, when my daughter turns 6 months old, my wife is going to go back to work, and I'm going to take 7 months off. And then he says this. He said, so I go to my hometown of, well, I can't remember, but of whatever his hometown was. And everyone nods knowingly in the group, and I'm looking, what's so special? And he says, this is the heart of conservative Sweden. This is the Bible Belt of Sweden. So I go to my hometown, and I tell my friends, I'm going to take 7 months off with my daughter. And he says, my friends look at me like I'm crazy, and they say to me, he says, why don't you just take the usual 3 months off? At which point I laugh, I'm thinking, the usual 3 months off? But this is how quickly social norms can change. So I believe, I've long been a utopian, I really believe that in 30 years, we're going to look back at a discussion like this and say, of course, is there a question here? Of course men are going to be doing 50% of the care work. And it's not just because more and more men may aspire to that and understand the meaning it gives to our lives, that swelling of our hearts, but because women are demanding it. The changes in women's lives are demanding it. I think that's going to happen.
Owen.
I want to just quickly spin through and play due difference to every question. I think you made a really good point about men from different strata of society. Maybe more successful, the kind of dads who are worrying about getting their sons into Eton, those kind of fathers, where do they factor into all of this? And I think it's interesting because the kind of young men that kind of Seány and I support through our projects are the kind of guys that patriarchy in some ways doesn't apply to them because they're less powerful than probably most of the women in this room in terms of what they've got access to and how they can exert their own power within this society generally. But those kind of gentlemen whose sons go to Eton really do have kind of like a stake in defining how we are in 30 years from now. You know, the kind of guys we work with, you know, I have to make a big effort to explain to them why they should be involved in the wider society, why they should vote, why they should care about who's in charge of their local council and stuff like that. You know, so hopefully we don't just work with disadvantaged dads. We run an expectant fathers program in hospitals in Westminster, as our colleague, the health visitor, was talking about, and I think we get a much broader spread of dads at those kind of things, because maybe their wives find it and say, you should go to this and be prepared. And a lot of the guys come along not knowing what to expect. We give them dollies, as you were describing, and they sit there with a doll for the whole day learning about holding a child and what to do. And I think at the end of that, we get some really brilliant comments about how it opened up their mind to things they didn't think about before, how it opened up their mind. We talk about shaken baby syndrome and why men are more represented in that terrible statistic as a consequence of not having support networks and not being able to talk and find support when stress reaches them, which it will with everyone with a new baby. And I think those men, if they really if they're given those opportunities, in 30 years we'll be in that positive utopian place that you're talking about. If we don't, and we've got to be really careful, because as our colleague here said, things don't always get better. You know, I think we're being sold the idea that things are better now than they were 20 years ago, but I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think debates around race and equality are a lot more stifled now. I think the people that are here today are still having the debates, but out there, with the young people we're working with, there are really, really set examples of what you're supposed to be, where your role should be, dependent on your race, your age, your gender, your financial income. So we've got to be really careful, all of us, to keep momentum moving and debates open around equality. And of course, equality within the home, you know, that's equality. 50-50 is equality. Equality means equality. So when I'm talking about equality, that's all I'm striving for. So equality in the home for men and equality in society for women. You know, as our colleague over here said, I want my daughters to have access to everything and anything. Right. I don't ever want to have to step in on their behalf. We're
more than out of time, but I want to ask Yousafzai just finally, because you in fact have the hardest job of all, because the forces in Pakistan to push things back are very strong, fabulously well funded, and from outside the country, and yet you are a standard bearer for pushing things the other way. So 30 years' time, where will it be?
In future.
Yeah.
You are very right that in our country, when we look to the hard reality, we feel that we are being taken back to the chaos, to the Stone Age. But we are fortunate that we are living in a world which like a global village. We have media, we have great communication, and in past it was very easy to keep status quo, to keep ruthlessness in a specific area, because people hardly knew about each other. Now we see the role models, we see the change, and I'm very hopeful, although the obvious circumstances don't look favorable. But not only in Pakistan, but I feel that the most powerful characters, the most powerful role models will come out from the more depressed societies. And we will make a change. Birds will sing, spring will come.
Well, what an uplifting way to end the session.